Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the 10 highest paid nursing professions. So I'm going to go through all those for you, explain them a little, and you might be surprised by what number 1 is because it's not what everybody thinks it is. We're going to be starting at number 10 and counting down all the way to number 1, which is going to be the highest paid nursing profession. Number 10 is a legal nurse. And I was kind of surprised about this because I thought they would have been a little higher on the list, but legal nurses on average make $75,000 a year. There are some benefits to being a legal nurse though, because you have a more flexible schedule and you also are able to work from home or work on the go, which you can't do with a lot of other nursing specialties. So while the pay is a little bit lower than the other nursing specialties, you have benefits, more flexibility, and you're kind of able to do your own thing while you're getting your work done. Legal nurses do things like testify in court, evaluate charts, speak with clients that are undergoing legal things at the time, and anything else that really has to do with healthcare and nursing they can be involved with. To be a legal nurse, you typically have to undergo some special education in law and get on the job experience as well. And that brings us to number 9, which is a staff nurse. The average staff nurse salary in the United States is $78,000. Now that does not include overtime, so if you work overtime, you will make more than that. And I actually found that sad that a staff nurse was the lowest paying position in nursing besides the legal nurse, because they do so much. They're involved in so much of the patient's care. They're there on the front lines. They're there at the bedside all the time. They're seeing things before anybody else. They're dealing with things before anybody else. I just thought it should be a higher paid specialty, but hopefully one day it will be. $78,000 is just the average, so depending on the specialty, you may make a little bit more or a little bit less. If you work in an outpatient setting, you might make a little bit less. If you work in the ICU, you might make a little bit more. If you work night shift, you could make more than if you work day shift. So there's a lot of variables there, but I just wanted to give a good average throughout all the states. Now we're on number 8, and that is gonna be a nurse manager. The average nurse manager salary is $83,000. And again, this varies by state and specialty, but a nurse manager is usually in charge of an entire unit. Sometimes they can cover more than one unit, but typically I've seen them in charge of just one unit. They typically have a master's degree or higher level of education, and they usually also have some experience going up the clinician ladder. So they might be clinician 3 or clinician 4. And they also were probably very heavily involved in the unit or the unit they worked on before they worked up to that position. A lot of times nurse managers were assistant nurse managers before they moved up to their nurse manager position. Keep in mind the nurse managers have to be available a lot of the time because if something happens on the unit, they need to be notified and they need to be involved. So it is a very involved job. Now moving on to number 7, that is going to be an informatics nurse, and they make an average of $88,000 a year. So that is basically a tech nurse is what I like to call it. So an informatics nurse deals with charting systems, deals with applications, and anything really electronic that we deal with in nursing. So for example, when we had a new charting system roll out at our hospital, the informatics nurses were the people who kind of tailored that charting to work for all different specialties, and they also taught our class on how to use that charting. So informatics nurses do a lot of technical things. They work on the computer a lot and they troubleshoot and help a lot when things are going wrong on the clinical end. So it's a very important job because everything is so automated nowadays and you need to have that support there, and it's great to have that support from somebody who knows what you're actually doing in your practice versus just a tech person who's never been a nurse before. A big benefit I see to this job is the hours are very regular. So they usually work during the daytime hours, during normal business hours. Now, some of them are on call at different times to help us if we're having issues with something, especially during a new charting rollout. I'm sure they work a lot extra, but typically they work during the week, Monday through Friday, business hours. Now we're moving right along and we're on number 6, which is a nurse supervisor. And on average, nurse supervisors make $94,000 a year. So we talked about nurse manager who's in charge of one unit in the hospital, while nurse supervisor is in charge of all the nursing units within the hospital. So they have a lot of responsibility. There's usually a day shift nurse supervisor and a night shift nurse supervisor, and they're who you would call anytime something happens on your unit because they can reach out to all the appropriate people when you're climbing the ladder. First you notify your charge nurse, your nurse manager, the nurse supervisor, and then so on. Everybody just keeps climbing up when something's happening. At night, typically your nurse manager is not in the hospital, so the night nurse supervisor is who you'll be dealing with. This is a very administrative position, so is nurse manager, but this even more so. So they're doing a lot with meetings, numbers, evaluations, solving conflict, and just really dealing with anything that needs to be dealt with on a higher level. They also speak for all of nursing when they go into upper level meetings with upper management, such as the CEO. So as you can see, it's a very important role, and it kind of sets the tone for the nursing culture in that hospital. Wow, and we're already halfway through the list, so now we're on number 5, which is a clinical nurse specialist. And they make about $106,000 a year on average. So a clinical nurse specialist is typically a master's prepared nurse or doctorate prepared nurse, they are basically an expert in a certain area of nursing. They go to graduate school, they specialize in something, and they are experts in that area. So they can be involved in a variety of things. So they can be involved in evaluation and outcomes and implementing new strategies to improve outcomes. They can be involved in research. They can be involved in teamwork and team building within a certain specialty in nursing, and they can also be involved in hands-on patient care. So they can evaluate patients, write treatment plans, and do things like that, kind of similar to a nurse practitioner role. So it's a very expansive role with a lot of different options for what they can do. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we're gonna start getting into the APRN or Advanced Practice Registered Nurses roles. So number 4 is a nurse practitioner. And on average, nurse practitioners make $108,000 a year. So this varies definitely by location, specialty, and if you work inpatient or outpatient, but that's just an average. So there's different kinds of nurse practitioners. There's acute care nurse practitioners, there's family nurse practitioners, and they can be master's or doctorate prepared. So that all really depends. They have a lot of autonomy. They're able to work independently. They can write prescriptions, see patients, make treatment plans, and they can also work in a team model. In inpatient nursing, I've mostly seen them work in a team model. So I've seen them work in a group alongside physicians, and they really have a lot of different options for what they can specialize in. So it's definitely a great field to go into. And that brings us to number 3, which is another APRN role, and that is a nurse midwife, who make about $110,000 a year on average. So a nurse midwife is like an OBGYN, so they can deal with family planning, gynecologic issues, they can deal with pregnancy, wellness, and also delivery of a baby. So they're involved in the whole process from preconception all the way to conception and then delivery. So it's a very important job, and it requires a lot of extra education as well. They also have a graduate level of education, master's or doctorates. And I personally always found this role very interesting and specialized, because you could be an OB nurse and then you can go to school to become a midwife. So basically your whole nursing career has been in the same field, so you're extremely specialized. You had experience from the bedside OB nurse position, and then you move into an advanced practice role, so you really understand things from all points of view. Okay, we've made it all the way to number 2, and that is gonna be what you guys all thought was gonna be number 1 when you first saw this list and first saw that we're talking about the highest paid nurses, because this is what everybody associates with the highest pay, and that is a CRNA. So on average, CRNAs, or Certified Registered Nurse Anesthetists, make $185,000 a year. That varies a lot depending on your practice and also what state you work in, as does everything else, but that's a pretty good salary. So nurse anesthetists are anesthesia providers. They also specialize in pain management. They manage patients all the way from pre-op all the way to post-op and all through the perioperative period. So it's a very involved job, and it's very high stress, and there's a lot of responsibility, as there is with a lot of nursing positions. And CRNAs are also graduate level nurses, so they have master's or doctorate degrees. Starting in 2022, they're all gonna have to have doctorate degrees. And just out of curiosity, I looked up how much the average salary is for a chief CRNA, who's the chief nurse anesthetist, and that is $216,000. So the chief CRNA is basically like the nurse manager of CRNAs. They're kind of in charge of all the CRNAs in that division or that hospital. And now we have made it all the way to number 1, numero uno, which might be a surprise to you guys, but number 1 is going to be nurse entrepreneur, because this is really an unlimited field. You can make as much money as you want, you can make as little as you want. It's definitely the capability for the highest salary, because there's no cap on how much you can make. For example, if you invent something, I'm always dwelling on inventing something, but if you invent something, you could become a millionaire. You could patent that, you could get a royalty, you can make millions and millions of dollars, which you really can't make in any other nursing specialty. Or if you start some kind of product for nurses, maybe a scrub line, scrub caps, shoes, anything like that. So nurse entrepreneurship is just limitless, and it's so awesome that we have all this specialty and all this education, and we're able to go into business for ourselves and do something kind of to give back to the profession, but also to build ourselves up. If you're interested in nurse entrepreneurship and you want some nurse entrepreneur ideas, I'm gonna link my video below, which is top 5 ideas for nurse entrepreneurs, things you can do to get started into a small business or a nursing related business. So check that out if you're interested. I consider myself a nurse entrepreneur, so I'm kind of partial to this specialty. If you don't know me, I'm also going to be a CRNA. I graduate in 2 months. So I love anesthesia, I love nursing, I love entrepreneurship, and it's just really exciting for me to make this list because I love sharing all these different options for people. Sorry, there's a plane going over. I live right next to the hospital and there's like helicopters and planes, but While everything isn't just about money, it's also good to know how much money you're gonna make so you can set your life goals, so you can plan your life. That is something that is very important, even though you don't wanna make decisions solely based on that. So I just wanted to share this with you guys. I hope you found it interesting and informative. I hope it answered some of your questions or maybe gave you some ideas that you didn't have before. If you have any questions, leave them down below for me. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, please, because that really helps me out. And be sure to subscribe for more nursing and life videos from me. And as always, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next week.